Hello everyone. I thought I'd do another one of my sort of talking audio without video videos. And because I quite enjoy making them. When I don't have a lot of free time to spare, I can just have a sit down and have a chat. Quite a one-way conversation, I do admit. But you can join in if you recognise that I'm having a pause. Okay, so today I'm talking about the history of the Call of Duty series. You may be asking why, because I've never uploaded any kind of Call of Duty content to my channel, which is true, because I don't really play Call of Duty anymore. I'll get onto the reasons why in this video, and I just want to talk about one of the most influential video game series, for better or worse, in the history, admittedly quite short history, of PC gaming. And gaming in general, but PC gaming, it's only been around for a couple of decades or less. About a couple of decades, but I wasn't really around back then to really, see the dawn of PC gaming. But modern PC gaming as we know it, with a desktop PC and a full colour monitor and a mouse and keyboard, maybe, 15, 20 years. Anyway. Why is Call of Duty so influential? Well, because it was very good. It for many years it led the that particular niche market of first-person shooters, especially with the release of the first one. And there wasn't a great deal of competition at the time, especially with World War II first-person shooters. After, what was it, the team that developed Medal of Honor Allied Assault, they fractured, and half of them actually went on to form Infinity Ward, who were responsible for many Call of Duties in the years that followed. That's partially why Call of Duty was so good, because Allied Assault was renowned as an excellent game, rightly so, and then most of the brains behind that went and made Call of Duty 1. Call of Duty 1, as the name implies, was the first game in the series, and it came out in 2003. That was in late October. It's traditional for Call of Duties to come at the very end of October or the first couple of weeks of November, just in time for Christmas. The first Call of Duty was based on the Quake 3 Arena engine, so if you've ever played Quake 3 and then you play Call of Duty 1, it may seem quite familiar. Call of Duty 1 was a Second World War first-person shooter, which took the player across the world in 3 campaigns, one in North Africa, I think, one in Western Europe, and one in Russia. So I'm trying to think where the British campaign was, because the early Call of Duties do have 3 campaigns, so the later ones have usually backwards and forwards between a couple of characters. The British campaign, I think it was in North Africa. It's quite hard to remember. I haven't played it for many years. But for the time, it was revolutionary. Just the way the game actually played. The aiming down sights, that was, at the time, quite an important feature. Obviously today, it's nothing special. Every game with weapons you can aim, or at least zoom in. But Allied Assault did have aiming down the sights, but only for weapons with scopes. So the sniper rifle was the only weapon you can aim down the sight with. Call of Duty, I think, maybe if it wasn't the first, it was definitely one of the first-person shooters to introduce aiming down the sights on every weapon. So rifles, submachine guns, sniper rifles, pistols, even bigger weapons like heavy machine guns and Panzerfausts, rocket launchers. Which, really switched up the dynamic of the game. It meant that 5 fights could happen at longer ranges. Before that, with games like Quake and Unreal Tournament, players would come very close together and, blow each other's face off with rapid-fire weaponry and, dart around in tight, dark corridors. But Call of Duty, much like Medal of Honor Allied Assault, began to introduce wider, more open maps. It does owe a lot to Allied Assault, but there's something about Call of Duty, for me, it just, the first one, it just felt a bit more pleasant to play. Maybe it was just more polished. Excuse me, I've got another cup of tea today. And Call of Duty was followed by what I believe is the only expansion pack for the Call of Duty series that's been released ever. Not including downloadable, digital DLC. This was before digital DLC. This is when you actually had to go out and buy a physical CD with extra content on it and install it. And that would sort of be its own game. This was called Call of Duty United Offensive, which came out in the following year, 2004, around in the year again. And I can still distinctly remember, even though this was over a decade now, I remember going into the high street and seeing these copies of United Offensive in a little cardboard box or whatever, just being put out on the shelf. And it wasn't in a sort of gaming shop or anything. They were just sort of on sale in this sort of clothes shop or something. And I was like, "Oh, Dad, I've got to get that. Wow, I didn't know there was a new Call of Duty. I've got to get it." And I bought it. It was 25 quid, which was pretty reasonable for sort of that time. Obviously, DLC has come down in price since then, but United Defensive wasn't just a couple of guns, a couple of camo skins. It was a whole game. It had a campaign with something like a dozen missions. And it had a whole new multiplayer with new maps, new weapons, and vehicles. Lots and lots of vehicles. United Defensive is not the only Call of Duty to have vehicles, of course. World at War had tanks, which weren't really, really fleshed out. There was a T-34-85 for the Russians and Panzer IV-H for the Germans, but they were statistically identical for balance purposes. But United Defensive had 4 different kinds of vehicle for both teams, which were the sort of light, troop carrier, not a half-track, but a staff car. The Germans had the Horch. The Russians had I think it was a Gaz or a Lend-Lease Willis Jeep. There was medium tanks, which was for Germans, was Panzer IV, Russians T-34. Heavy tanks, I think that was a Tiger for the Germans and an IS-2 for the Russians. And there was tank destroyers, which was an Elephant for the Germans and I think an ISU-152 for the Russians. And those United Defensive multiplayer battles were loads of fun. The vehicles, the big infantry charges, the wide open maps. It was sort of like halfway to Red Orchestra, but obviously without quite as much realism. Infantry had health bars back then. Before Call of Duty 2, which introduced the regenerating health, you had a health bar which you replenished by picking up health packs. And it was a lot of fun. United Defensive and the first title, excuse me again, were a great deal of fun, and I have very fond memories of those times, even though I haven't played them both for well over 6 or 7 years. And I doubt many people are back on, apart from a small contingent of hardcore fans. Those were some of the best gaming memories. Both great games. I can recommend picking both of them up. If not for the multiplayer, because you'll probably struggle to find a match, but for the incredible single-player experiences. Even though the graphics are dated now, and the games may not play as smoothly as the modern ones, the campaigns are like playing a movie. Even later campaigns like Call of Duty 4 and World at War, they just can't compare to the atmosphere of these early ones. Infinity Ward really put their heart and soul into the early campaigns. This was back before multiplayer was the focus. These days, after sort of Call of Duty 3, the multiplayer began to take on more and more of the focus of the developers' time, until the campaign sort of became a sideshow, and multiplayer would appear on the television trailers, and you'd have celebrities against green screens flying around with jetpacks and all that crap. But back in my day, the campaign was the focus, and I wish they would go back to not necessarily neglecting the multiplayer, because multiplayer was still a lot of fun, but the fact that these early games really had the attention of the developers focused on the campaign to a much larger extent than today. So I believe the latest Call of Duty Advanced Warfare, the campaign is down to something like 6 hours, which is a travesty. They're basically saying, right, well, you can sort of have a go on that if you want, and then once you got that out of the way, get onto the multiplayer, where you can buy all our retarded camo skins and weapons that shoot sideways, and, you know, a hand grenade that when you throw it, it shouts, your mum, or whatever else. But back then, the campaign was the campaign, and not some sort of, you know, skirmish, a few skirmish scenarios stuck together. The story arc took you across the world, multiple continents, very good voice acting, very good cinematic set pieces, like in United Defensive, you play an American soldier during the Battle of the Bulge, and you have to cross a field. I believe it was inspired by Band of Brothers. I'm trying to remember when Band of Brothers came out. I think it was around the same time. But I don't know if you remember in Band of Brothers, when they're just on the outskirts of Bastogne, and they're crossing the field, you know, hopping from sort of wheat to wheat, those big wheat domes, I don't know what they're called, you know, the stacks of wheat in the field, trying to get closer and closer to the town. There's a mission just like that in United Defensive. Then came Call of Duty 2, which was, again, late in the year, 2005. This was the next-gen Call of Duty, and it was released on Xbox 360 and later PS3. This saw a much improved graphical update. Excuse me again. Obviously, still nowhere near today's standards, but it probably looked about as good as Call of Duty 4, a little bit worse. But if both were turned up to max, then they really didn't look that different. Because Call of Duty, I'm not sure if they've updated the engine. They're always saying they're going to, but I don't know if they have. Call of Duty has used the same engine for many, many years. The IW engine. Obviously, they increase it to 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. But if you strip it down and go all the way back, it's still focused on that Quake 3 Arena engine. It may be unrecognisable now, but you know, those core mechanics are still very deeply buried somewhere. That's why Call of Duty has played exactly the same for many years. Call of Duty 2 was still campaign centric, but the multiplayer was really good. Better than Call of Duty, in my humble opinion. Call of Duty 1, that is. Because it had everything that Call of Duty had, but it was brought forward into the next generation with improved graphics and sound effects, and they tweaked and streamlined the gameplay, and it was a great deal of fun. I think Call of Duty would be, if not my favourite now, but definitely have some of the fondest memories of playing. What was it? There was one specific type of play that many servers were accustomed to, which was search and destroy on a North African map called Tujon, and with bolt action sniper rifles only. That may ring a few bells for some of you if you ever were into the Call of Duty 2 scene for any serious amount of time on PC. There were loads of these servers, bolt action rifle servers, and Tujon, Tunisia, Search and Destroy was the main one. So you'd have this very dynamic map with rooftop combat and closing alleyways and staircases and everything, and it was very enjoyable. So yeah, COD 2, one of my favourites. Call of Duty 3, this has been largely overlooked and forgotten. Many people call it the worst Call of Duty. And I think after Modern Warfare 3 and Advanced Warfare, or Ghosts even, it definitely isn't. I think after Call of Duty 2, people were expecting the same sort of experience, but the multiplayer was a little different. They began to delve into the sort of progression system where you could rank up, and I don't think you could actually unlock anything, but you got a little rank and number next to your name. But this was one of the launch titles, I think one of the launch titles with PS3. It was definitely on Xbox. It was on. I don't think it came to PC. Sorry, no, it didn't come to computer, which is why I didn't play it very much. I did have it on console. I think I had it on PS2, but I didn't play that much because PS2 online didn't really work. You had to have a sort of network adapter and plug it in the back and everything. So once I did the campaign, which was good, sort of shelved it. But I did come back to it later when I bought it on Xbox 360. And I played it for, I think it was only a few weeks before I don't know, lost it or sold it or something. But Call of Duty 3, I don't think it deserves its reputation as the worst COD. I wouldn't call it a bad game. I wouldn't say any of the Call of Duties are necessarily bad. Mediocre, perhaps, well, apart from Ghosts. But then, I'll have to, take that with a pinch of salt, because I've never played Ghosts. I'm going off what all the reviews and the criticisms are of Ghosts, and it really sounds like a bad game. Even worse than Modern Warfare 3, which, well, wasn't that bad, but it wasn't good. For a game that had such a large budget, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. We're about a decade ahead. Now we change to the Modern Warfare story arc. Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. November 2008. 2007. Got that wrong, didn't I? So this will be the first Call of Duty for many people. Because it revitalised the series and brought it into modern times. This was the first 21st century Call of Duty, but it certainly wouldn't be the last. Call of Duty 4 was received to critical acclaim. Everything about it was complimented. The graphics, the gameplay, the sound, the whole experience, the multiplayer, the campaign. But this marks a change in tone for Call of Duty. The campaign is no longer the sole focus, or should I say the primary focus. Call of Duty 4 saw a shift towards multiplayer as, if not being more focused on than single player, but certainly a much larger portion of the developer's time focused on developing the multiplayer. But definitely after sort of Modern Warfare 2, you can see the campaigns just sort of, they're sticking it in there because they have to. World at War had a very good campaign. I've always been a fan of Treyarch. World at War and Black Ops, two of those games, two of my favourites in the series. I keep getting distracted here. I love talking about Call of Duty. Not all the time. I don't just, start talking about it in the middle of the shopping centre. Or like if someone's serving me at the counter in Costa, I don't go, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 was released in November 2009. But once I've started talking about it, it's one of those things. But Modern Warfare, if you ask someone what their favourite Call of Duty is, about 8 out of 10 people will say Call of Duty 4, if they're over a certain age. If they're under 18, they may say, I don't know, Modern Warfare 2, Black Ops 2, Ghosts, if they're a little bit strange. But, the first Modern Warfare is regarded as a classic by many people. I never really understood the hype. I'm not saying I didn't enjoy it, because it is a good game, but I think part of the problem is, I didn't get Call of Duty 4 when it first came out. I sort of saw it on a shelf about 6 months after it came out, and I was like, oh yeah, Call of Duty, I haven't played that for a long time. So I bought it to see where Call of Duty had gone, because this is sort of, after I'd been playing Call of Duty 2 for a long time, I picked up COD 4, and yeah, it was fun. I never really enjoyed it as much as the people that call it the best Call of Duty ever, though. I never quite understood that. But that's just me, you're entitled to your opinion, and so am I. And if you don't agree with me, you're wrong. I'm just kidding. So yeah, Modern Warfare, almost said Modern Warfare 4 then, oh dear. Modern Warfare introduced the whole perk system, you know, your 3 perk slots, and they introduced create a class where instead of you just select from a list of weapons when you spawned in. So before now, for example, on Call of Duty 2 and Call of Duty 3, you'd select a team, and on that list, you get a list of weapons. So if you selected Russians, you'd see a list of weapons after just picking your team. So Mosin Nagant, Scoped Mosin Nagant, PPSH, SVT-40, DP-28, so on and so forth. Basically the most well-known weapons that country produced. And weapons were nation-specific. So if you spawned as a German, you couldn't spawn with a Thompson, for example. You'd have to choose an MP40, but you could pick up a Thompson off a dead Yank. Call of Duty 4 got rid of that. Now you can choose any weapon regardless of faction. Faction doesn't really matter after this point. It's just, you know, what skin your character happens to be wearing. I don't refer to the actual skin of the character. I mean that in a sort of technical computing sense. The skin, the polygons that make up that character, the appearance of that character. So I think it was OP4 and US Rangers. But yeah, the creator class system appeared. It was quite simple back then. You didn't have all this pick 13 crap flying around. You just chose, what was it? Your primary weapon, your secondary weapon, which back then was only pistols. No crossbows or sort of mini shotgun pistols or machine pistols, just pistols. Your grenade, primary and secondary grenades, so, you know, actually I think frag grenade was the only kind of grenade you could choose, apart from flashbangs and stuns. And your 3 perks, and I think that was it. Weren't any wild cards or whatever these fancy doohickeys are in Black Ops 2 that they introduced. But Call of Duty 4, good map design, good weapon design, balanced game, good sound effects, good gameplay, good game overall. It deserves recognition for being a good game, but in my personal opinion, it's not the best Call of Duty, at least from how much I enjoyed them. Okay, so next is Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. This, despite the sort of the controversy surrounding it, like, you know, overpowered weapons and a few bugs and glitches now here and there, I really enjoyed this game. This was the game that I really played online a lot with my school friends. You know, I'd come home from school, get changed into casual throat's a bit dry. Get changed into casual clothes, do my homework, then pick up the old 360 controller, open up a party with 4 or 5 friends and go and do search and destroy and just blow shit up. This was a fun game. It's sort of, this is a game that lived by the motto, if everything's overpowered, nothing is. So every weapon was a viable choice. There were a couple of weapons that, you know, weren't quite as good. WA-2000 comes to mind. At least when I tried to use it, it was just sort of, you know, it didn't have the stopping power of the bolt action rifles or the Barrow 50 cal. But most weapons were definitely on par with each other. That introduced customizable kill streaks. That's another thing I forgot with Call of Duty 4. It introduced kill streaks. Rewards for getting kills without dying. 357. So UAV recon, which revealed enemies on the map. Airstrike at 5 kills, which would fly over and bomb a certain point on the map. And 7 kills, which was an attack helicopter, which would circle around the map, shooting enemies with the cannon on the front. Modern Warfare 2 introduced customizable kill streaks, and 15 of them, I think. There was all sorts of stuff. UAV jammer, a care package containing a random kill streak, sentry gun, stealth bomber, chopper gunner, AC-130, which was my favourite. I really need to stop making these weird noises with my mouth. It's a habit of mine. And it expanded on the creator class. I don't think it added any new kind of slots for new equipment, although it did introduce new types of offensive grenade, the Semtex, which stuck to things when you threw it. It would stick to walls, stick to players, That was fun. Still had the 3 perks, still had the primary and secondary weapons, although the weapons selection definitely expanded. And they introduced the riot shield, which was pretty fun, but not always that effective. And I think that was the game that introduced explosive secondaries, like the Stinger and the RPG. Can't remember if Call of Duty 4 allowed you to choose the RPG and create a class, but maybe it did, so I won't say for definite. Modern Warfare 2 also had a pretty fun campaign. If you remember right at the end, you have to pull a knife out of your chest and throw it at General Shepard and you get him in the eye. And then the end of that campaign is sort of mysterious. You don't know if Roach is going to survive. Or is it Soap? I get confused between Roach and Soap. Which one was it? I think you play Roach in Modern Warfare 2. Nope, Soap McTavish. Soap. I'm getting off track here. But anyway, the character you play in Modern Warfare 2 is sort of dying, and then he comes back in Modern Warfare 3, just about. But I don't think you play the same guy in Modern Warfare 3, because Soap dies in Modern Warfare 3. So, Modern Warfare 3, which was 2012. I have missed out some games here, but that's because I'm doing the Modern Warfare story arc before I go back and look at the Treyarch titles. So Modern Warfare 3 was a bit disappointing for me because it was basically a carbon copy of Modern Warfare 2, just with a few updates here and there, a bit more customization and everything. This is where Call of Duty starts to get a little bit stale. After the revolutionary Black Ops, which introduced the point system, which allowed you to spend points on creating a class, unlocking attachments and so on. Modern Warfare 3 was just a bit bland, you know. This is when Infinity War's title started to go downhill. Well, not necessarily downhill, but stopped going up. Apart from, you know, a few problems here and there. But Modern Warfare 3, the campaign, well, it says something that I can't really remember the campaign. It was a bit bland. I do remember bits of it, obviously, you know. Soap dying. The final scene where you wrap a big cable around Makarov's neck and break the glass and he hangs himself. That was cool. And you actually play as Captain Price in that mission, which was a lot of fun. Or do you? I'm trying to remember. I think you do, yeah. Yes, you do. Because the guy you're with, as you're climbing up the skyscraper, sort of gets impaled on a metal spike or something. So, yeah. I think you play as Captain Price in the very last mission. Again, I could be wrong. But it was fun, but it wasn't memorable like the early campaigns. Speaking of which, I didn't really talk about the Modern Warfare 2 campaign, which, probably one of the most controversial points, the mission where you enter an airport and gun down civilians in a Russian airport. That was pretty damn controversial. Excuse me. And they actually had an option when you start the campaign. It says, one of the missions is controversial and may upset you. Would you like to skip this mission? Which is pretty handy if you're trying to go through on veteran. You can skip one mission for free, but I didn't skip it because I wanted to experience it myself. It was definitely, you know, interesting because you don't really see that sort of thing in a video game very often. Actually perpetrating an act of terrorism in a video game. But it wasn't as horrible as the news websites and, you know, BBC News and whatever made out to be. It's not like you're going around chopping the heads off babies and hanging people from trees and stuff. But yeah, it was a bit rough, but not so bad that you'd have sort of PTSD after playing it. So Modern Warfare 3, basically the same as Modern Warfare 2, really. That's the problem with the later titles. They don't really do anything new. You can only remake the game so many times, but unfortunately people are still falling for it and buying it in their millions, so, you know, until people stop buying, we're not going to see much change, so that's up to you and I. I've stopped buying Call of Duty for, well, what is it? Black Ops 2 was the last Call of Duty I bought. That was 3 years ago, 2.5, but anyway. So Modern Warfare 3 is the latest and perhaps final title in the Modern Warfare 3 Modern Warfare Ark, because then they switched to Ghosts and Advanced Warfare and whatever else. But I'm going to go back in time now to the next Treyarch title, which was developed by Treyarch, of course. Messed up my words a bit there. World at War. World at War came after Call of Duty 4, and it was a World War II title. Some people complained that they didn't carry on the innovation into the modern setting, but perhaps I was in the minority, but I was happy to see World War II again, because I always preferred World War II games to modern games. If you give me a well-made World War II game and a well-made modern game, I'll choose the second World War game pretty much every time. It's just an interest of mine, but I find it ironic that Call of Duty moved to the modern period to kind of switch it up and make it interesting, but now the market is saturated with modern shooters. So don't get me wrong, they're not all bad, but there's so many of them. And it's just a hint of irony that the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Infinity Ward titles are all modern. And I'm just thinking, how long can they continue this before they make Modern Warfare stale as well and go back to a different period? Black Ops 1 went to Vietnam, which was a nice change. The first Call of Duty there, and they pulled it off well. Which brings us quite nicely onto Call of Duty Black Ops. No, it doesn't, because I haven't talked about World at War yet. This is the problem with a really long video without a script. Bear with me. I do apologise for being a bit messy here and there, but this isn't the sort of lecture at university. I'm not expecting you to take notes, and my next video will be a questionnaire, and if you get it wrong, you'll have to unsubscribe and live in exile on an island for the rest of your life. But World at War was a return to World War II, which was fantastic news for me. When I found out, I was like, yeah. But I don't think I had any way of playing it at the time, because this was before I had an Xbox 360, and the PC I owned wasn't really good enough to play it. So I ended up installing it on my brother's PC, because just as it happens, he was away on a 2-week holiday when I picked it up, and I installed it, and I really enjoyed it, of course, because I'm a World War II nut. But then he got home, and I got in a bit of trouble because obviously I installed a game on his PC without asking him. He didn't really mind that much, but you know, it was pretty uncourteous of me. So I can't remember if he took it off his computer or not. Couldn't blame him for doing that, but I didn't really have a way of playing it, apart from on his PC, which I couldn't use that often because obviously it was his PC, he was using it. But I didn't really play World at War much until I got my own Xbox 360 in the summer of 2009. That's when I began console gaming. Apart from my earlier dabbles in PS2, I began console gaming, and that lasted from 2009 till 2012, when I switched back to PC after my brother gave me his old PC, which was the one that I installed World at War on. But I didn't install World at War on it again. So I played it on 360. This was another great game that I enjoyed a lot with friends online. Despite the fact that, you know, weapons were simpler back then, you didn't have laser sights and sort of red dot sights back then, they did manage to pull off a pretty wide selection of creator class options. Mostly by not limiting factions to specific nation weapons, which Call of Duty 4 introduced. So if you were on the German team, you didn't have to choose German weapons. You know, you could be a Japanese soldier armed with a Thompson, or a German soldier with a PPSH, or whatever else. You could choose anything, but that was a lot of fun. The campaign was fantastic. Treyarch's campaigns are always, at least in recent years, better than Infinity Ward's. Black Ops 1 and Black Ops 2 campaigns were fantastic. Modern Warfare 3's campaign, like I said, I've forgotten most of it, because it was so-so. But World at War had a fantastic campaign. Partially in part to Gary Oldman and his fantastic voice acting as Sergeant Reznov. Reznov is one of the best video game characters, who is unfortunately now dead, as of Black Ops 1. But World at War, the maps were great. It had a sort of gritty, dark, grim, dark feel about it. It wasn't happy, bright and shiny like Call of Duty 4, dancing around in the desert. But you were in destroyed towns and cities with flames and fire and destruction and death all around you. And that was excuse me, that was fun. And then after World at War, one of my favourites as well, came Black Ops 1. Now, Black Ops 1 was probably my favourite Call of Duty after World at War, because everything came together so nicely. The way they thought out the multiplayer. They introduced this currency system, so instead of having to unlock your attachments by getting a certain number of kills, you could purchase the attachment you wanted with these, I can't remember what they were called, Call of Duty points or something. Which was a great idea, because it allowed you to get what you wanted without having to use a weapon for ages, just to get a sort of different coloured sight or something. But Call of Duty Black Ops was, both in multiplayer and single player, a great title. I think it has the best campaign of any Call of Duty, at least in my opinion. The whole sort of the mental issues of your character Alex Mason, sort of, you don't really know whether or not Reznov is actually dead, even after the game is finished. You have to sort of search around, gather clues and evidence to sort of realise that Reznov has died. And these visions of Reznov that are appearing in the game aren't really there. So at the end of the game, one of the missions is like Reznov handing you a dossier, like a folder, and then later on in the game you sort of have a flashback, and you're standing in the room alone holding this file. And it's sort of like, oh my god, brain fuck, mind fuck. But that was a great story. From the first mission to the last, the first mission especially, the whole Step 1, find the keys. Step 2, ascend. Step 3, whatever else. Skewer the winged beast. Freedom. That was great. Escaping on a motorbike. Going into the jungles of Nam. Going along a big air base during the attack of... It was Khe Sanh. All the big Vietnam battles are there. Khe Sanh. I say that, I can't remember the names now. The Ho Chi Minh Trail. There's the Ho Chi Minh Trail. I think there's the helicopter mission. The Tet Offensive. Everything. Vietnam. It's the Vietnam Call of Duty, and it was really nicely done. I love Black Ops 1, and I would probably play it and buy it, except the other way around. Buy it and then play it if I could find it somewhere cheap. Maybe if Steam has a sale on it, I'll buy it again. But I get the feeling not that many people are playing it anymore because, that's what happens to games when they get older. So, there was a sequel to Black Ops, which, funny enough, was entitled Black Ops 2. And this is the last Call of Duty I purchased. I can't remember if I pre-ordered it. I did pre-order Black Ops 1. But Black Ops 2 is the latest Call of Duty that I own. I think, let me just check the list of dates. Nope. Modern Warfare 3. Yes, it is, actually. I was going to say Modern Warfare 3, but that came before. I don't own Ghosts, and I don't own Advanced Warfare, but I don't think I'm missing much. Black Ops 2, once again, same problem with Modern Warfare 3. It didn't really change the game very much. The campaign added some interesting changes. It wasn't just a straight, run-of-the-mill campaign. You could actually do side missions, and your choices would, to some extent, influence how the game would play. So there were side objectives and this and that and the other. Not as memorable, definitely not as memorable as the first Black Ops, but not bad either. The multiplayer. This is the Black Ops, not Black Ops. This is the Call of Duty that I've played the most of in recent years. Actually, it's the only Call of Duty I've played for the last 2 or 3 years. But I haven't played it for about over 6 months now because I recently uninstalled it to make room for other games. The online was fun. Basically, it felt like Modern Warfare 3. Perhaps not identical, not as bad. It's not that it feels like Modern Warfare 3, it's just that it feels like the Call of Duty that came before it, which is an unfortunate tendency for Call of Duty titles to feel like the previous one. This is the last Call of Duty I can really talk about from a personal perspective, because, as I said, this is the latest Call of Duty that I have played and owned. The multiplayer, I think this is the one that introduced the Pick 10 system. So they got rid of the currency, they got rid of the traditional create class, and you could choose 10 sort of items. Each one would have a cost of 1 point. So your primary weapon would cost a point, an attachment would cost a point, a perk would cost a point, grenade, secondary attachment, secondary weapon, and wildcards, which were sort of customizable, sort of like cards that customized your class to allow you to add another weapon or a perk or a grenade. And the gunplay and the gameplay and the whole experience was enjoyable, certainly. Didn't have the enjoyment factor of Black Ops, but, you know, it was good. Better than Modern Warfare 3, certainly. Then comes Ghosts and Advanced Warfare. I haven't played either of these, but considering how they've been received, that's probably for the best. Ghosts, well, I haven't played it, but, you know, I don't think I'm missing much, because I think that's being renowned as the worst. I don't think renowned is the right word. Heralded as the worst Call of Duty. Very glitchy, boring, copy-paste with Modern Warfare 3 in regards to engine and gameplay. So yeah, Ghosts. If it floats your boat, don't feel guilty. Well, just feel a little bit guilty. And then Advanced Warfare, which I believe has been received as an improvement on Ghosts, but not exactly the game to end all games. So overall, unfortunately, Call of Duty has begun to stagnate. But what could you expect to happen for a series that has lasted this long? I think it's the longest running, definitely first-person shooter series. It's, what is it? 14 and a half years old now. 14, November 03 to 13. 14 years and a few months. Which is a long time for a series of games, so. But if they don't begin to, you know, revolutionise their own games, there's going to be a problem, because they're getting boring, which is a shame. It's a shame to see the mighty fall, as they say. Well, they don't really say that, but I can't remember the proper saying. But you know what I mean, don't you? Yes. If you don't, you're out. But, that's where we are today. Call of Duty Advanced Warfare. The series has certainly advanced a long way, tish, but not necessarily for the good, for the better of the series. But, you know, the problem isn't with the problem. Getting my words muddled again now. The problem isn't that the games are necessarily bad. It's just that they're mediocre. They're nothing special. They're sort of 5 out of 10. Each game seems to be like less exciting than the last, which is annoying. I mean, I love the early games, and I love some of the sort of middle period games like World at War and Black Ops, but the last 2 or 3 titles are just meh. But I don't know. I don't think they've announced the next title yet, but I'm waiting for them to go back to the Second World War. If they don't, then it'll be a shame, because that's where Call of Duty's roots lie, and I think if they go back to their roots, we could see a revitalisation of the series. So I do apologise for this being such a long video. I think I'm going to have to change this into one of my podcast videos because of the sheer length of it. And I do apologise for the occasional slip-ups and word muddlings, but it's going to happen with a long, unimprovised video. Unimprovised? I mean improvised. See, there I go again. And I think since this video is so long, it won't hurt if I squeeze in a quick channel update. War Thunder. I'm starting to not necessarily go off it, but go off making videos about it. There's only so much I can sort of get out of games before I sort of, I feel like I'm repeating myself, making a new video. I suppose I could. It's been a long time since I've touched my Vehicles in their Variants series. I'd prefer to make those than the generic sort of, play a game and talk over it. So, but there's a lot of work and research and writing that goes into it. It takes a long time because my only option would be to literally copy and paste text out of Wikipedia. because otherwise I'm having to reword everything into a sort of around a 2,000 word essay, just to avoid sort of repeating what's already online word for word. But since Wikipedia is a sort of free service, and I believe you're allowed to use what's written there in the public domain without editing it, so maybe I could do that. Because at the moment it takes a very long time to write this essay and record it in the microphone, then get a bit of gameplay footage and historical footage and talk over it and edit it and put it all together. But I'm making excuses. So that's where Call of Duty stands today. That's where my channel stands today. Wins light variable, and Happy New Year. I think it's a bit late, and I may have said it before, but I felt like I had to say something, just in case I'd missed it. So, thank you very much for listening. If you've listened to this entire thing, every second of it, then you get my personal seal of approval and a small gold sticker to, stick on your forehead or whatever. So, thanks very much for listening. This has been Reach for the Sky. This is Reach for the Sky, and this will be Reach for the Sky, since I don't plan on changing my name anytime soon. Thank you, and goodbye.